In 1913, one American company built more motorcycles than anyone else on the entire planet. Indian. Not Harley. Indian. They were winning races in England, smashing speed records, and stamping their name on the fastest machines money could buy. That was 1913. By 1953, the factory was padlocked and the company was dead. Then it came back and died again. And then it came back a second time. And here's the part that genuinely makes no sense. After dying twice, after 50 years of bankruptcies and broken promises, and a name that got passed around like a hot potato, Indian Motorcycle is now pulling in close to $500 million a year. So how does a company die twice and somehow end up richer than ever? Buckle up. The thing that made Indian a legend was speed. Winning races, breaking records, building the fastest motorcycles on Earth. That same hunger, that itch to make one giant bet and chase the win is the exact thing that would bankrupt this company, twice. But in 1901, none of that had happened yet. It was just two guys and a wild idea. The first guy was George Hendy, a former national bicycle racing champion who was building bicycles in Springfield, Massachusetts. The second was a Swedish-born engineering genius named Carl Oskar Hedström, who built motorized pacing bikes and who happened to be one of the sharpest mechanical minds in the country. Hendy saw Hedström's work and basically told him to build a motorcycle. In May 1901, Hedström finished the very first one. A few weeks later, he rode it straight up a steep, loose gravel hill on Cross Street in Springfield, while a crowd of about 500 people stood there fully expecting it to stall halfway up. It did not stall. It just climbed. And that right there was the moment Indian was born. Quick thing about the name, because it is great. For the first few decades, it was not even spelled the way you would expect. The early tanks said Indian Motorcycle, without the R, motocycle. Today, that looks like a typo somebody forgot to fix. Back then, that was the brand. And the brand absolutely exploded. By 1903, Hedström set a world motorcycle speed record at 56 miles an hour. In 1904, they rolled out that deep, gorgeous Indian red paint that collectors still lose their minds over. They built the first American V-twin production motorcycle. They went racing on the terrifying wooden board tracks, these steeply banked oval death traps where riders hit over 100 miles an hour, wearing basically a leather cap and a whole lot of optimism. And in 1911, Indian sent a team to the Isle of Man, the most brutal road race in the world, and finished first, second, and third. A clean sweep. On foreign soil, against everybody. Then came the bikes that made them immortal, the Power Plus, the Scout, a middleweight that riders swore you simply could not kill. And the Chief, the big, muscular, skirted fender cruiser that basically defined what an American motorcycle is supposed to look like. The Springfield factory got so enormous they nicknamed it the Wigwam. By the mid-19-teens, Indian was the single largest motorcycle manufacturer on the planet, building a peak of around 32,000 bikes in 1913. 32,000, more than anyone alive. Harley-Davidson, the company we now think of as the American motorcycle, was the scrappy underdog chasing Indian's taillight. Sit with that for a second because it is about to flip completely. Up to this point, Indian had been on top of the world. That was about to change, and the first wound was completely self-inflicted. When America entered World War I, Indian made a patriotic and financially catastrophic decision. They sold almost their entire production, tens of thousands of motorcycles, straight to the US military. Sounds amazing, right? A huge government contract. The problem is that left almost nothing for their civilian dealers. So all those loyal dealerships that had built Indian into a giant, suddenly with no bikes on the showroom floor, shrugged and started selling Harley-Davidsons instead. And a lot of them never came back. That's the detail everybody misses about this story. Indian did not lose its crown in some dramatic head-to-head showdown. It handed the crown away, one empty showroom at a time. All through the 1920s, Harley steadily closed the gap and then pulled ahead, and Indian never really got the lead back. Then the Great Depression hit, and Indian was circling the drain. Enter a man named E. Paul DuPont. Yes, that DuPont. The chemical and paint dynasty. In 1930, he merged his own struggling luxury car company into Indian, shut the cars down, and took over. And honestly, the guy was kind of brilliant. He cleaned out the corrupt management, leaned on his family's paint connections to offer something like 24 different colors when most motorcycles came in whatever shade you were handed, and he brought in a designer named Briggs Weaver who gave the Chief those swooping Art Deco skirted fenders that are still drop-dead gorgeous today. Indian started winning races again. A rider named Ed Kretz won the very first Daytona 200 on an Indian back in 1937. And by 1939, a company that had been hemorrhaging money was actually turning a real profit. For a while there, things genuinely seemed fine. In 1940, Indian sold nearly as many motorcycles as Harley. They were right back in the fight. Then World War II arrived, and once again Indian threw its whole factory at the military, building tens of thousands of olive drab army motorcycles. They even built an experimental shaft drive machine designed for desert combat. It lost out to a little vehicle you might have heard of, called the Jeep. DuPont kept Indian breathing through the hardest years America ever threw at it. But in 1945, he was tired, he was sick, and he sold his controlling stake to a man with big plans, zero motorcycle experience, and what might genuinely be the worst product idea in the entire history of the company. His name was Ralph B. Rogers. He was in his mid-30s, he was an investor, and he looked at Indian, a brand famous for big, brawny, rumbling V-twin engines, and decided that what America really wanted was small, lightweight, British-style bikes. Skinny little vertical twins and singles. The Indian Aero, a new vertical twin Scout. Later, a 500 cubic centimeter machine called the Warrior, tiny, modern, European, which, looking back, was either incredibly bold or completely insane, because it was 1948. American GIS had just come home from the war, and they wanted big, loud, all-American iron. Rogers handed them the exact opposite. He even dropped the beloved V-Twin Scout the bike riders were actively begging for, which made dealers and customers absolutely furious. And the new bikes weren't just unpopular, they were broken. Rogers rushed them to market with almost no development time, and oh boy, did it show. The generators failed. The engines got assembled with mismatched gears from two different suppliers, so they rattled and clattered right off the line. And when Indian rolled these shiny new vertical twins out to prove themselves at the races in 1948, they didn't just lose. They face-planted, dropping out with mechanical failures while the bikes they were supposed to beat went on without them. That's a rough look, by the way. Your big modern future breaking down in front of everybody. Then the timing got even crueler. In 1949, Britain devalued its currency, which made actual imported British motorcycles, the Triumphs and the BSA motorcycles that Rogers had been imitating, suddenly cheaper than Indian's knockoffs. So now Indian was selling unreliable copies of British bikes that cost more than the real British bikes. You cannot make this stuff up. Rogers bailed out around 1950 and went off to run Texas Instruments, which worked out fantastically for him and catastrophically for Indian. The company limped along for a few more years under new management, slashing production, scrambling to survive. And then, in 1953, the last Indian chief rolled out of the Springfield factory. The wigwam went dark. After 52 years, America's first great motorcycle company was dead. That is death number one. And that really should have been the end of the story. But the Indian name didn't get a respectful funeral and a glass case in a museum. Instead, it got dragged into one of the strangest, most chaotic afterlives any brand has ever lived through. For the next 45 years, Indian basically became a ghost that everybody wanted to wear like a costume. First, a British company called Brockhouse got the name and had a genuinely bizarre idea. Take British Royal Enfield motorcycles, slap Indian badges on them, and sell them to Americans as Indians. Traditionalists were horrified. It's like buying a hot dog with a label that says steak. Only about 7,000 people went for it, and that whole experiment fizzled out by the early 1960s. Then came Floyd Clymer, a racer and publisher who started using the Indian name in the 1960s, back when who actually owned the rights to that name was a genuine legal mess. He bolted the Indian badge onto little Italian-built mini bikes and machines with Royal Enfield and Velocette engines. When he died in 1970, his attorney kept the whole thing wheezing along until it went bankrupt in 1977. And from there, it just got dumber. The Indian trademark got passed around between moped makers and a parade of hopeful owners, each one swearing they would bring the legend roaring back, almost none of them actually building a motorcycle. One guy who bought a claim to the name in the 1990s instead of producing any bikes got himself convicted of fraud and money laundering. Another guy's revival straight up collapsed in court. The most iconic motorcycle brand in American history had been reduced to a logo that lawyers fought over in conference rooms. For nearly half a century, Indian existed as basically a rumor, a name on rusty gas tanks at swap meets, a thing your grandfather got misty about. The bikes were gone, the factory was gone, all that was left was the legend and a crowd of people arguing over who got to use it. But a legend is worth something, and in the late 1990s, somebody finally decided to do this for real, or at least they thought they did. In 1998, a federal bankruptcy court finally awarded the Indian trademark to a new group. In 1999, they merged a bunch of companies, including a California outfit, and started building motorcycles again, this time in Gilroy, California. People still call these the Gilroy Indians. And on paper, it actually looked promising. They built a new chief, then added a Scout and a model called the Spirit. The bikes had that unmistakable Indian look, the big skirted fenders, the whole vibe. Early on, they used off-the-shelf S&S engines, then moved up to a bigger 100 cubic inch motor. Real bikes rolling out of a real California factory with the real name on the tank. For the first time since 1953, you could walk into a dealership and buy a brand new Indian. But building motorcycles is brutally expensive, and this is where the numbers start to hurt. Just buying the rights to the Indian name reportedly cost somewhere around $18 million. Then, in 2001, a big investment group called Audax, run by former Bain Capital guys, poured in another $45 million to scale the whole thing up. And the plan was enormous. Grab 5% of the entire American cruiser market, sell up to 14,000 bikes a year. It never got close. The bikes were decent but pricey. The company was burning cash faster than it could ever bring it in, and in September of 2003, a major new investment deal fell apart at the very last second. Audax, the biggest backer, pulled the plug, and just like that, on September 19, 2003, the Gilroy factory shut its doors. 380 workers were laid off on the spot, with no severance. In about 4 years, they had built roughly 13,000 motorcycles. And then nothing. That is death number 2. Same company, same proud name, killed by the exact same thing that killed it the first time. A giant expensive bet that ran clean out of money. Real quick, if you're enjoying this slow motion corporate train wreck even half as much as I am, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button. I dig into stories exactly like this every single week. The rise, the fall, and the comeback nobody saw coming. And trust me, the comeback in this one is absolutely wild. Because believe it or not, Indian was not finished dying yet. By 2004, the Indian name was back on the auction block. And this time it got bought by 2 guys who actually seemed perfect for the job. Stephen Julius and Stephen Hees, business school classmates who had already pulled off something incredible. They had revived Chris Craft, the classic American boat brand, and a famous Italian yacht company. Bringing dead legends back to life was literally their specialty. Their firm won Indian at a bankruptcy auction. And there is this great little detail. Julius found out he had won the bid at 2 a.m. in London, and his honest first reaction was, and I am only paraphrasing slightly, "Wait, what did I just buy?" Because what he had bought was basically the name and 2 trailers full of paperwork. No factory, no engineering team, no dealer network, nothing. So the 2 Steves built all of it from scratch in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. They sank somewhere north of $30 million into a new plant, a new engineering team, an entire new operation. And in late 2008, they started hand-building a genuinely improved Chief, with a bigger, fuel-injected engine and beautiful old-school styling. They even did a slick World War II-inspired limited edition with pin-up art on the tank. There was just one teeny problem with the timing. Their roughly $32,000 motorcycle launched, in the exact words of the man who would eventually buy the company, straight into the teeth of the worst economic storm since the Great Depression, late 2008, the global financial crisis, the single worst possible moment in modern history to try and sell an expensive luxury toy. It did not work. And this time, it was not even because the bikes were bad. This time the bikes were actually good. It is just that almost nobody on Earth was buying a $32,000 cruiser while the economy was on fire. So by April of 2011, the two Steves gave up and sold the entire Indian operation. So let us actually count this up. Springfield, dead in 1953. Gilroy, dead in 2003. That is 2 deaths. And now Kings Mountain, not quite a 3rd death, but waving the white flag in 2011, the 3rd time in 60 years someone had tried to carry this name forward and run straight into a wall. At this point, betting on Indian was a sucker's game, so who in their right mind would buy it now? And more importantly, why on earth would this time be any different? The answer was a company called Polaris. If you've ever ripped around on a snowmobile or an off-road four-wheeler, you've probably touched a Polaris product. They're a massive power sports company out of Minnesota, and crucially, they already knew how to build motorcycles because they had their own brand called Victory. So when Polaris bought Indian in April of 2011, this wasn't two dreamers and a trademark. This was a serious, deep-pocketed manufacturer with real factories, real engineers, and real money to spend. And they were patient. Instead of rushing some half-baked bike to market like almost everybody before them, Polaris moved production to Spirit Lake, Iowa, and spent 2 full years getting it right. In March of 2013 at Daytona Bike Week, they finally revealed the payoff, a brand new engine called the Thunderstroke 111, the first clean-sheet Indian engine in 7 decades. They had tested the thing over 1 million miles. This was the real deal. That August, they dropped 3 new motorcycles at once, including a big touring bike called the Chieftain. And riders, who had been burned over and over and over by fake Indian revivals, took one look and went, oh, this is the real one. Then in 2014, Polaris brought back the Scout. The Scout, the legendary middleweight, reborn as a modern liquid-cooled 100-horsepower machine starting at just under $11,000. It became Indian's bestseller almost instantly. Polaris has since sold something like 100,000 of them all around the world. Here is how serious Polaris was about making this work. In early 2017, they made a brutal call. They killed off Victory, their own homegrown motorcycle brand, the one they had been building for almost 20 years just to pour every last resource into Indian, their own brand, sacrificed for the legend they had resurrected. And then they did the most Indian thing imaginable. They went back to racing. In 2017, Indian rolled out a purpose-built flat-track racer called the FTR 750, and they reassembled a wrecking crew, a direct nod to their legendary race team from the 1940s. In their very first season back, their rider Jared Meese won the championship. Then they won it again and again. Indian won 8 straight premier flat-track titles in a row. The FTR 750 was so dominant that it retired with roughly a 75% win rate and over 100 race wins, finally bowing out when American Flat Track moved to new production-based engine rules for the series. And Meese grabbed a record-breaking 10th career championship in his farewell season. Indian even started winning the King of the Baggers series, racing 700-pound touring bikes around road courses like they were sport bikes. Now remember how this whole thing started. Winning races, breaking records, beating everybody. 80 years later, on the absolute brink of extinction, that is exactly how Indian clawed its way back from the dead. But here is the part the title promised you. Indian didn't just come back, it came back rich. When Polaris took over, Indian was basically a rounding error in the North American market for big, mid-size, and up motorcycles, just a couple of percent. By 2023, Polaris says Indian had grabbed around 13% of that segment. 13, from an afterthought to roughly 1 in 8 big bikes sold across North America. And while Indian was climbing, Harley's sales were sliding, and the gap between the old King and the resurrected Challenger got smaller every single year. Then in that same year, 2023, something happened that hadn't happened the entire time Polaris owned the brand. Indian Motorcycle turned an actual annual profit. After more than a decade of patient, expensive investment, the bet finally paid off. How rich are we talking? In the year leading up to the middle of 2025, Indian was pulling in roughly $478 million in revenue. That is the kind of number that would have made the guys padlocking the Springfield factory back in 1953 fall straight over. And then the story took one final turn. In late 2025, Polaris announced it was spinning Indian off into its own independent company and selling most of it to a Los Angeles private equity firm called Carrollwood. That deal officially closed on February 2, 2026. For the first time in over a decade, Indian was a standalone company again. Around 900 employees, factories in Iowa and Minnesota, a design center over in Switzerland, and a brand new CEO who, get this, used to be an executive at Harley-Davidson. And the timing is almost too poetic. 2026 is Indian's 125th anniversary. 125 years after Carl Hedstrom rode that very first machine up a gravel hill in Springfield, the company that died twice is starting yet another brand new chapter. Now, is this a guaranteed happy ending? Honestly, no. Sales softened a little in 2024, and there is always real risk anytime a brand gets handed off to a new owner hunting for a return. The next few years are a genuine question mark. But just think about where this brand has already been. Killed in 1953, reduced to a logo that lawyers fought over for half a century, killed again in 2003, surrendered in 2011. Every reasonable person who ever looked hard at Indian Motorcycle over those decades came to the exact same conclusion. It's over. Let it go. And every single time, they were dead wrong. That very first Indian climbed a hill nobody believed it could climb. Loose gravel, steep grade, a whole crowd standing around waiting for it to fail. It just kept going. And it turns out that wasn't only a motorcycle climbing a hill. That was the entire company in a single ride. Knocked down, written off, declared dead, and somehow always grinding its way back up the slope. So the next time you see that script logo and hear that deep Indian red rumble past you on the street, just know you are looking at the most stubborn comeback story in all of American motorcycling. A brand that flat out refused to die, twice. If you enjoyed this one, you'll probably love the other rise and fall stories on the channel. Go check out the video popping up on your screen right now and drop me a comment. I want to know, should Indian have just stayed dead, or are you glad it's still out there roaring? Smash that subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next one.